In this presentation, you're going to learn a little bit more about why Hitler focused so much on the Jewish. It really isn't something that's new. Jewish people all throughout history have been attacked for their religion, and we're going to look at why that is and why we think that Hitler was so focused on them. Of course, we can't go back in history and specifically ask Hitler, but we can look at all the documentation and artifacts that he left for us, and historians have been able to come up with a list of top 10 reasons why. The first word we're going to look at is prejudice. Prejudice means to prejudge or to make up your mind about someone before you actually know anything about them. Have you ever just met someone and you're like, I know this about them or I know that about them just based on what they're wearing, what they look like, how they walk? Well, that is a guess or an estimate that you've made about that person before you even know them. You are actually judging a book by its cover when you are doing prejudice. Scapegoat is another word that we're going to look at. Scapegoat means to place the blame on either a person or a group of people. Anti-Semitism is another word we're going to use. This is a term that's used when people are prejudiced against Jews just because they are Jewish. Remember, this is judging a book by its cover, and people are judging Jewish people just because they are Jewish. It is actually a racial term that was invented in 1879 by a German journalist called William Marr. However, anti-Jewish feelings are much older than 1879. If you take a look at the chart on the screen, you'll see that there are still people who feel that they are being prejudiced against, even in today's world, just because they follow the Jewish faith. So why were the Jewish targeted? That's often a question that people ask. Why did Hitler hate the Jewish so much? Well, it actually isn't a new idea. There are people all throughout Europe, all throughout the Middle East, and even Northern Africa that didn't like Judaism or people who followed the Judaism faith just for that reason. Hitler, of course, hated the Jews, which is why he targeted them. And he's got some other reasons for that, which we're going to review in this presentation. But why were Jews targeted in general? Well, the general kind of consistent belief that historians have narrowed it down to is that Judaism, the first monotheistic religion, consisted of four components. God. Judaism believes that their God is the God chosen by the Jews. Their laws, which is in the Torah, the Jewish peoplehood, or the bringing together in Israel, and the chosenness, the belief that the Jews are God's chosen people. Secondly, the belief that they are chosen by God to achieve the mission of bringing the world to God and to God's moral law. Number three, Judaism attempts to change the world for the better. And finally, fourth, as a result of Jewish commitment to their faith, they almost always have led higher quality lives compared to their non-Jewish neighbors in various parts of the world. For these four reasons, this is why historians believe that Jews have been the target of bad feelings and bad judgments throughout history. Jewish expulsion and exclusion isn't something that's new. Throughout history, Jewish populations were expelled or not allowed in various countries. Judaism is a monotheistic faith, and when it first came about, much of the world's civilizations were polytheistic, meaning they believed in many gods. So Judaism was something new. They believed in just one God, meaning monotheistic. I've got a very long list here of places where they were either not allowed or they were kicked out of. That's what expel or expulsion means. And I started with England in 1290, going all the way up to more modern day in 1948 to 1967. In Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, people who followed the Jewish faith were not allowed into those countries. And that's exclusion. They're excluding them. Now, of course, there are other times in history and in other places of the world. This is definitely not a complete list. Anti-Jewish campaigns have existed on 3 separate occasions during the past 350 years. Probably the most well-known is the Nazi Holocaust between 1939 in 1945. But what many people don't know is that in Eastern Europe, between 1648 and 1649, there was another massacre of Jewish. That was known as the Chelmetsky Massacre. It was also a very deadly massacre, but not as well known as the Nazi Holocaust, perhaps because there wasn't as equal mass communication in the 1600s as there was in the 1900s. Perhaps because the Nazis took things to a much larger, much broader spectrum. Not really sure. But the Nazi Holocaust was not the first time in history where we see Jewish people being slaughtered and exterminated just for following their faith. In fact, it's even continued today in the 21st century. There is a destruction of people who follow the Jewish faith and the Jewish state by their enemies. Yes, in the 21st century, there are still people who do not like people who follow the Jewish faith just for that reason alone. Again, this is when we are seeing signs of prejudice, when people are judging books by their covers before they really get a chance to know them. Hitler's obsessive hate for Jews remains a very popular and a very debatable topic amongst historians today. Like I said earlier, we cannot go back in time and ask Hitler, why did you focus so much on the Jewish faith? Why did you hate them so much that you wanted to exterminate them and wipe them off the face of the earth? Of course, we know he also graduated the other types of people, other populations, but for some reason, his hatred for the Jews was extra strong. What we can do is we can look at what he left behind. We can look at all the artifacts, all the personal accounts, all the documentation, and as historians, we can come up with theories. And what I'm going to go over with you next are the top 10 reasons why historians believe that Hitler had a deep-seated hatred for the Jewish population. We're kind of going to go backwards. We're going to start with number 10. Number 10 is Jew and communist influences. Hitler associated anybody who was of the Jewish faith with people who supported Marxist class war theories. The division amongst Germans in the conditions after World War I fueled Hitler's hate for the Jews. They became his scapegoat. When World War I ended badly for Germany, he said, I'm going to blame this on the Jewish faith. They are the reason why we kind of got the low end of the stick, so to speak, at the end of World War I. Number 9, the Great Economic Recession or Decline. Remember, World War I is extremely expensive, and Germany blunted or had to accept total blame for the war, and they had to pay back other countries. As a result, their own economy really took a nosedive. Number 8, Hitler believed that the whole reason why Germany lost World War I was because of the Jews. Hitler believed that people who were following the Jewish faith were actually poisoning the nation of Germany from the inside out. Number 7, early influence of anti-Semitic literature. Hitler was not a very well-educated man, but from the time he was very young, he did read a lot of literature that was very anti-Semitic. It really fed the stereotypes that people held about Jewish people and the Judaism faith. And he had this strong sense of belief that Jews are disloyal, they're untrustworthy, and not capable of being true German citizens as a result of his long-standing readings that were anti-Semitic. I mean, in this case, you could think of it as if you had always wore sunglasses every single day of your life. Obviously, the colors in the world are very different when you're wearing sunglasses. And if you take those sunglasses off, you see things very differently. Well, all throughout Hitler's life, he was always wearing these sunglasses, always told a certain thing and always read a certain thing about the Jewish faith. So he didn't know any different. Number 6, Hitler's childhood. Historians claim that Hitler was a Jew himself, which his mother never told him about. There is some speculation of the fact that Hitler's mother and father were not married when he was conceived and born, and that his father was Jewish. And because his father was never around, he targeted his anger instead of just on his father's faith. Now, again, that's speculation. We can't go back and ask Hitler that. There's also a claim that when Hitler was very young, his grandmother was suffering from breast cancer. Now, cancer in this time in history was almost a death sentence for anybody who got it. There really wasn't a whole lot known about it or how to treat it so that people who had it were able to recover and have longer lives. And the doctor who was treating his grandmother was Jewish. And so the fact that she didn't make it, that she did die from breast cancer, could also be another reason why he hated the Jews. Also, his mother worked as a housekeeper or a maid for many years for a very, very wealthy Jewish family. And he saw all the things that this family had that he didn't. So his childhood had many different things that could have stemmed or sparked his hatred for the Jewish population. Number 5, brain damage as a soldier. Sources claim that before Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany, he moved to Munich and joined the German army to become a soldier. While in the battlefield of World War I, it's said that he received a very nasty, very serious head injury. Once the head injury healed, it was observed that he actually had some brain damage and was suffering from some mental health issues that got worse. And as a result, he had to no longer be in the army. He had to leave the military. And this mental health perhaps is what caused another hatred for the Jewish population. Number 4, Hitler's master race theory. Hitler had created a master race theory that preached the idea of a pure human being. According to him, only white people having Nordic features were worthy of living in Germany. It was his depiction of an Aryan race, which he is considered, or which he considered to be known as the pure race of Germans. He wanted to eliminate the impure races to sustain only the very, very pure race. This was his theory of the strongest should survive, and he identified what he felt was the strongest. And he went so far as to identify people not just by their eye and hair color, but as you can see in the picture, actually measuring the size of facial features or the distance between facial features. And if it didn't meet what he felt was within that scope of the master race, then they weren't pure. Number 3, he believed in a Jew conspiracy. He said that Jews were conspiring to dominate the world, and that's why he hated the Jewish population. Number 2, Hitler envied the people who were following the Jewish faith that were very wealthy. He found that majority of them were merchants or held high position jobs that paid very well, and he was very envious or very jealous of that because people who were not Jewish were getting jobs that didn't pay as well, and he felt that that was very controversial or very unfair. And finally, the number 1 reason was politics and nationalism. Hitler had witnessed other politicians taking advantage of the hatred for the Jewish faith, and he thought, well, hey, I can kind of imitate that. Even though the Jews made up less of the population than non-Jews, the people who were Jewish were in very well-paying jobs. They were in scientific research. Some had won Nobel Peace Prizes. They were in the finance department or arts and literature, very prominent jobs, very well-paying. And still, there was this hatred amongst other groups for the Jewish faith. So what he decided to do was use that to his advantage, to get ahead. He used them as a perfect scapegoat for all of Germany's problems. And it was very easy in a time after World War I when people were feeling very cheated by the world, having to have accepted the full blunt of the blame for World War I.